Joining us today for another conversation, as you know, folks are on the campaign trail. We have the privilege to be speaking with State Senator Diana DiZoglio. She represents the 1st Essex District. Senator, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. It's great to be here today with all of you. Very exciting times.
If you will, for folks who don't know who you are, you're running for a statewide office. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, a little bit about myself. My name's Diana DiZoglio. I'm a senator from the Merrimack Valley. I was born to a 17-year-old single mother in the community that I currently actually reside in, the city of Methuen. We moved back and forth between Methuen and Lawrence throughout my childhood, depending on where my young mother could find work as a young nurse's aide. I went through the public school system here, graduated from our local community college, and then earned a seat at Wellesley College, where I was so grateful to attend, but I was only able to actually attend there because of a full financial scholarship that I had received. And the reason why I think it's important to mention that is because it really was due to those financial investments made into my future success that I was able to actually see some future success. And that inspired me to get in community service. I worked at various nonprofits through the years, working with teen survivors of domestic violence, working with inner city youth, helping to expand diversity, equity, and inclusion programming in my community. And I also simultaneously through these years, as many families do, Kevin, was working other jobs. I was waiting tables. I was running a small cleaning business and cleaning homes and office spaces throughout my community. You might love what you do as a day job, but it doesn't always pay the bills and afford you with the opportunity to live in the community that you're working in. So like many families across Massachusetts, I was juggling those positions. And it was during that time that I was offered a job working at the State House as a legislative aide on Beacon Hill. And though I had no idea what a state representative did at that time, I did know that I needed health insurance. So I went in for a job interview and I got the job. And let me tell you something, it was like drinking water from a fire hose. I learned about all of the great things that our state legislature can do for our communities, from investing in early intervention for children to public education and public higher education to fighting for access to health care, for fighting against the negative impacts of climate change, making sure we have a robust transportation system. I could go on and on and on about all the great things I learned that our state legislature can do. But I also, during that very short amount of time, learned about the flip side of how our state government can operate. During that very short time, I was sexually harassed as a younger woman in my 20s. This was many years ago. And the way that it was thought appropriate to deal with that harassment was to require that I sign a taxpayer-funded, your dollars, taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreement that prevented me from talking about anything that I'd seen, witnessed, or experienced behind those closed doors amongst Beacon Hill's most powerful politicians. But I didn't let them get rid of me or keep me quiet. And I didn't leave state government like they told me to do. I instead decided to run for state representative myself, and a little over a year later made my way back into that same chamber as the youngest woman serving in the House of Representatives at that time. And since then, Kevin and friends, I have fought tooth and nail to make sure that families like mine, working families in our communities, have the representation that they need up on Beacon Hill. Too many times we see that families have been disenfranchised or dismissed or ignored by systems in our state government and our state agencies that just aren't working for all families in Massachusetts the way that they could and the way that they should. I took on that battle regarding the abuse of those taxpayer-funded NDAs that silence workers about discrimination, harassment, and abuse of all kinds. And I'm happy to say that in the Senate, we've passed my bill to ban the use of those agreements across state government. But we have, unfortunately, some in state government who continue to dig their heels in on this simple matter of abuse of your tax dollars and on issues of transparency and accountability across the board. During the pandemic shutdown period, we remember when vaccines were taken and funneled to mass vaccination sites and to folks in the private sector with no bid, no RFP contracts in the millions of our tax dollars. As a senator during that time, I stood up and I demanded equitable access for our elderly, our disabled, our immunocompromised, those without transportation, for example. But I also demanded a full audit and an investigation into how much in our tax dollars was handed out to friends of the administration during that shutdown with no bid, no RFP contracts, because we deserve answers. When the Holyoke Soldiers Home tragedy occurred and we lost 77 veterans due to mismanagement at that home, I stood up as a senator and I called for a full investigation and audit into what happened, of course, for transparency and accountability, but more so because the families of those who lost those loved ones, those 77 veterans, they deserve the truth and they deserve justice. And just one more example. When McKinsey Consulting continued to be contracted with, despite the findings months ago that they were actually guilty in helping Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family cover up their contributions to the opioid crisis by willingly lying about the addictive properties of their product, OxyContin. Our Attorney General stood up and announced a lawsuit against McKinsey Consulting, but our state government continued to contract with this company. When that happened, I stood up as a senator and I demanded that we stop contracting with a company who's proven to abuse the public's trust time and time again and willingly contributed to the devastating impacts of the opioid crisis, which has devastated countless families across our communities, including mine and many of yours, those who are listening at home. As a state senator, I've been standing up, I've been speaking out, I've been legislating, I've been advocating. I've been calling for audits, I've been demanding investigations, but as your next state auditor, I won't need to keep calling for audits or demanding investigations. I will audit and I will investigate these matters and much more on your behalf, because we know that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And for as forward thinking as Massachusetts is, our state government continues to be ranked as the least transparent state government in the entire nation, according to almost every single good government group. Friends, we can do better. But in order to do better, we're going to need to start shining a light in those dark areas of state government to expose what's going on, to find where the gaps are so that we can work together to fill those gaps, so that all families can have a seat at the table, regardless of their bank balance, their family background, or their zip code.
Again, if you are just tuning in, we are speaking with State Senator Diana DiZoglio. I accidentally said Diane. That is erroneous. She is, again, running for state auditor. What is it about this particular office that you find appealing to want to campaign for higher office?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, as I just discussed, I've been a state senator, I've been a state representative, I've been a community advocate, and, leading programs in various nonprofits. I've done this work. I've been a small businesswoman. I've been, somebody who's been actively engaged pretty much my entire life. And I think that, when I think about this auditor's role, look, a lot of people in my community have asked me why I would ever leave being a senator to run for a position like auditor. And here's why. As auditor, I'll be able to effectuate the change that I have been calling for as a state senator. As a senator, I'm one out of 40 people who gets to take a vote at the State House on matters of importance regarding our shared values in our communities, making sure we have adequate funding for things like education, public safety, our councils on aging, our roads, our bridges, so on and so forth, right? And I can take a vote on making sure that we're holding our government agencies accountable in ensuring that those dollars are spent wisely, and also in making sure that we have processes and procedures that are effective for folks across the board. But the authority that I don't have is being able to actually go into those state agencies and audit them and produce reports that will shine a light on where we're falling short so that we can do better with the legislation that we're offering. So I will be able to have subpoena authority in that office to get access to information that otherwise may have been denied. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to get access to data points, percentages, how many times I've tried to get how much we're spending on particular programs and been denied that information from public agencies regarding our public tax dollars. Friends, that's unacceptable. As state auditor, I'll be able to get access to that information and make sure that as a result, you have access to that information as well, so that you can know what's going on regarding your tax dollars, and then take appropriate action in contacting your legislators and the governor's office to ensure that you're advocating and talking about, are able to talk about what you think about how your tax dollars are being spent. But you have to be able to get access to that information before you can take appropriate action, right? So I'm running to make sure that we expand access and opportunities, again, for all families in Massachusetts, regardless of their family background, bank balance, or zip code.
So I would ask you, how closely have you researched what the current state auditor, Suzanne Bump, has done during her time in office? What are some of the things that you'd look to build on, or maybe even consider modifying?
Look, I think about, regional equity, right? We hear a lot of times certain areas get attention more than others. Certain areas of the Commonwealth get more funding than others. And I can tell you as a state senator, that's actually been what I've seen to be the case. Unfortunately, we really need to do a lot more work on regional equity. Look, I come from the Merrimack Valley. We're on the New Hampshire border. I represent a lot of communities that are right on that border. And it's been extremely challenging to make sure that our community sees equity when it comes to getting its fair share of funding for roads and bridges, our schools, our local senior centers, our public safety departments, so on and so forth. I could go on. And I know that regions like yours as well have had those challenges presented in making sure that you get your fair share. Something that the current state auditor did that I think that we need to continue to build upon, she looked at the payment in lieu of taxes issue. It's called the pilot program here in Massachusetts for short. Pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. And what the pilot program is essentially the state reimbursing cities and towns for land that the state takes up that city or town would have otherwise been able to have collected property taxes on, for example, right, through either commercial real estate or residential real estate. But the state has now taken it over, whether it's for, building purposes or whether it's for generally state reservations, and state parks are the easiest example I can give, right? A state park. So let's say there's a state park in your community. Your community is supposed to be getting paid by the state and reimbursed for the state to use that land, because the city otherwise would have been able to see some revenue coming in for other purposes. And we're supposed to be funding those payments back to your community at appropriate levels. And they're supposed to be appropriate with regards to what the city would have been able to potentially gain from that land if they had used it otherwise. But what's happening, according to the report from the auditor's office, is that the state is shortchanging our communities, and significantly so. And her report outlined that, there isn't equity when it comes to making sure that cities and towns are getting their fair share from the state. So I'd like to build upon that and do a deeper dive into what particular areas we are seeing lack of funding in. She did a report on transportation funding, for example, regarding Western Mass transportation, infrastructure, broadband, so on and so forth. And she showed how the current state formula actually doesn't benefit rural, remote communities, for example, and that they're getting shortchanged and they're not seeing their fair share. So I think we need to do a lot more work on making sure that we're talking about specific subject areas. I'd love to look at education funding. I'd love to look at transportation funding, so on and so forth, and make sure that our communities are getting their fair share and build upon that great work.
How about something like the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funding? Is that something that if you're elected, you'd also want to keep an eye on, seeing that the distribution points is going to be over the next couple of years?
For sure, and thanks for bringing that up. Yes, as a senator, I voted for the ARPA spending plan and where those dollars would go. And one of the amendments that I co-sponsored in that debate was an amendment to require that we track how those dollars are being spent so that we can keep an eye on those dollars and make sure that there's accountability and that there's not just this free-for-all going on with the billions of dollars that's been released and gone through this process. As state auditor, I will build upon the work that I did as a state senator to require accountability, and I will make sure that our office is using every tool in the toolbox to monitor how those funds are being spent, to make sure that there's transparency and that those dollars are not getting wasted, of course.
ARPA being, the funding mechanism under the Biden administration because of COVID to help with infrastructure. Let's talk a little bit about COVID. How is COVID going to play a role regarding campaigning this year and deciding the next state auditor?
Yeah, if we're talking about the campaign trail, I will just say, look, it's been challenging for every candidate across the board to get their message out there. We need to collect 5,000 signatures just to get on the ballot. And you can imagine how challenging that can be, during a time when things are largely virtual, right? Due to public health concerns. So, certainly it's been a little bit different of a challenge than, what you would expect without COVID at play. But look, this is the world that we're living in, and we're working hard, and we're going to get, our signatures out, we're going to get our nomination papers out there, and you'll see us on the campaign trail. We're going to do our very best under these circumstances. Safety first, public health first, and those of us that are campaigning, we can find ways around it and get creative.
For the everyday voter who doesn't know what the auditor's office may necessarily know for a deep dive per se, what do you feel are going to be some of the issues that are going to better inform the voter when they go into vote come September? I believe it's September 6th, and in November for the general election?
I'm sorry, you cut out for the first part of that, Kevin. I'm so sorry. What was the first part of the question?
So the first part of the question is for voters don't necessarily understand the full scope of what a lot of the offices are. Auditor, they understand what the Attorney General is to a degree. For folks who don't necessarily know all that entails the auditor's office, what are going to be some of the key issues to better inform them for when they go in to vote for the primary and then the general election in November?
Yeah, look, the auditor's office, and I have to explain what the auditor's office does quite often. It's not really the highest profile position, right? It's definitely not the glamorous position. The auditor is the chief accountability officer for the state of Massachusetts. It is a watchdog role. And regardless of what issue is important to you, whether it's climate change, environmental justice, education, access to health care, a robust transportation system, making sure that we have access to great mental health services, and that we're fighting against the disease of addiction, fighting for women's rights, fighting for social justice, all of these different things. And I could go on and on. No matter what the issue of importance is to you, why it's important to know what who the auditor is, who the candidates are, and why this role is important is because if we want to make meaningful change on any of those fronts, we need transparency and accountability first. We can't make meaningful progress on these issues up on Beacon Hill unless we know where we're starting from so that we can decide where we want to go from there. And right now, the challenge at Beacon Hill has been getting access to the data, again, regarding how much we actually have in these programs, regarding what's currently happening, and getting percentages about the different impacts of the different programs that we see happening across state government. I can tell you as a member of the Senate that I have fought and led the charge on transparency and accountability efforts within the legislature, fighting to make sure that we have at least 24 hours to read a bill, that we make all of our committee votes public, to make sure that we're subject to the public records law, and so isn't the administration. None of these things have passed yet. So business up on Beacon Hill is done largely behind closed doors and out of the eye of the public. Think about the fact that our State House has been closed now. We just had the 700-day anniversary of the State House being closed completely to the public. That's not even one constituent in the Commonwealth has had the opportunity to go in and to have a meeting with their state representative or with their senator. Now, this has been happening at a time when we have concerts taking place. We have sporting events happening. We had the State of the State address for the governor over at the Heinz Convention Center, but not at the State House where it normally is. That's not something that I think should be happening right now. We certainly need to make sure that we are doing things in accordance with public health guidelines, and make sure that we have public health and public safety as the most paramount of issues to address. But at the same time, certainly, if we as those governing the state can allow for folks to have meetings in private businesses and in other areas and to congregate there, certainly we can find a way to open up the doors of the State House and make sure that we can take meetings with residents who have questions about what's going on in the people's house, regarding the people's business, regarding the people's tax dollars. And right now that hasn't been happening. So I've been pushing to open up the doors to make sure that folks can get access to what's going on behind those closed doors on Beacon Hill. And as state auditor, I will continue that work to make sure that we're opening up the process so that you can participate in what is supposed to be the democratic process up on Beacon Hill.
As auditor, your role will change when it comes to legislation being filed. But would you still want to be somehow, as an auditor, involved in the process when certain bills are being filed? And what kind of bills would you see yourself lending your office and your staff to perusing such bills and legislation?
Look, we talked about the NDA issue, right? I was given a non-disclosure agreement as a younger woman in my 20s through the Speaker of the House's office back then. And since then, I've been fighting to pass legislation, which we passed in the Senate, to ban the abuse of taxpayer-funded NDAs that cover up the misdeeds of powerful politicians and others across state government. While we've been able to, Kevin, get that through the Senate, that hasn't passed the House yet, and it still hasn't been signed off by the governor. So as state auditor, I plan for example, to go in and do a deep dive across our state agencies to find out how much in your tax dollars has been abused to silence government workers about abuse or potential corruption or harassment or discrimination that's going on in our state government, where your tax dollars are being able to be used to silence them about those abuses, to make sure that powerful perpetrators are protected. I'd like to know how much in our tax dollars has been spent on those types of agreements. Now, as state auditor, I'll be able to shine a light on that and do an audit and use my subpoena authority to get to the bottom and to get that issue and to get those answers. But I'm not running just to be your auditor. I'm running to continue to be your advocate. And I will be continuing to file legislation pertaining to, for example, that matter, to make sure that we're banning the abuse of your taxpayer dollars through the funding of non-disclosure agreements to silence victims across the board. So I'll be able to do a deep dive, use subpoena authority, get to the bottom of how those tax dollars are being abused, how, when, where, why, and then produce a report. And then I'm also able to still work on legislation and go into committee hearings and work with my colleagues in the legislature to ensure that we're taking action on the findings of my office. So yes, my experience in the legislature will absolutely be of great assistance when I hopefully, with your support, that I humbly and respectfully request, that I will be able to take that work to the next level and make sure that I'm using my experience as a legislator to inform my work as a state auditor and then continue to advocate for bills' passage.
If you're just tuning in, we are speaking with State Senator Diana DiZoglio. She is a candidate for state auditor. We have come to that time of our conversation where I ask you, is there something that we haven't discussed, but you'd like to take a moment to at least to talk about?
Yeah, I think when people think about the word auditor and the title auditor, that they think of counting beans. That's what I've heard from my friends and loved ones and supporters that have known me in my role of state auditor. And like I've said, they've asked, why would you ever leave being a senator to go count beans in a back room somewhere? Just want to reiterate that the role of the auditor, once again, is the watchdog role and the role of chief accountability officer. And we can do a lot more than just count how the tax dollars are being spent and where they're being spent. We can also look at processes and procedures in state government and how they have failed our children, our families, across the board, and make sure that we're working to fill the gaps that we identify. I'll give one example, Kevin. DCF, the Department of Children and Families. We saw that during the shutdown, during the pandemic, there was a child that was lost, that should not have been lost, that was found starved to death in his home. and he had some mental health challenges. He should not have been placed back in his home. The home was known to have been abusive. It was known by the Department of Children and Families that he had been abused in the home that they decided for some reason to put him back into. And because of that, we saw a tragic loss of life. Devastating. Those types of things cannot continue to occur in state government through state agencies that are tasked with protecting children in the Commonwealth. I will use my role as state auditor to make sure that we're doing a deep dive, not just into how the dollars are spent in programs like the Department of Children and Families, but that we're doing a full investigation into their processes and procedures so that those types of circumstances where children fall through the gaps and there is loss of life as a result, so that those things do not continue to occur. So we need to make sure that we're taking deep dives into more than just the dollars, but into the processes and the procedures that are operating in our state government that can either cause tremendous harm or be of tremendous assistance. We should be of tremendous assistance, these state agencies, to families that are in need. That's what we're taxed with. That's what the mandate is, right? That's why you pay what you pay in taxes, is to make sure that these things are done correctly. So our office will go in and not just do, efficiency audits and not just do the regular audits, making sure that things are functioning correctly at that time, but we'll also look at past circumstances like that to make sure we're analyzing where the agency may have gone wrong so that we can report on it. And again, work alongside of the legislature to file subsequent legislation to try to address the gaps in the system so that those types of tragedies don't take place again. And those types of things are what make me so passionate about this role. It's the opportunity to help families who need it most, to continue the work in the trenches to make sure that, again, all families have access, all families have opportunities, regardless of their bank balance, their family background, or their zip code.
Senator, last question, and that is, if folks want to find out more about your campaign, they want to get involved, where can they go to get that information?
Thanks so much. Great question. You can go to www.diana4ma.com. You can use the number 4 or the word 4. We planned ahead here. So diana4ma.com, and then you can email me at info@diana4ma.com. That's Diana with one N. And then you can also call 978-984-7747. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we are on LinkedIn. If you just do a quick internet search as well, you can find out a lot about my background and my work in the legislature, and also why I'm running for state auditor. And I hope that you'll do that. Look me up, find out more about me. And I do respectfully ask for your support and for your vote. I wish I could see you all in person. Obviously, in this age of COVID, that's not always the case. But I do just want to use this as an opportunity to say, I can't do this without you. I'd love to fight on behalf of all families in Massachusetts for a more transparent, accountable, and equitable state government. And I hope to have your support on September 6th, the day after Labor Day, September 6th in the Democratic primary. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you again, Senator, for making yourself accessible so we can be able to have this conversation.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone.
And we want to thank you for tuning in. Until next time, have a great day.